So I have a couple of questions about your own career path, and
Yep.
then I have some questions about like Hearst magazines.
Sure.
So I guess to like start off, I know we kind of already discussed this during the panel, but could you talk a little bit about like your major in college and how that helped your transition into the media print industry?
So again, you have to go back to a long time ago to high school, and basically, effectively, neither of my parents went to college. My dad was a sanitation worker, my mom was a secretary. It was kind of always, impressed upon me, especially by my mom more than anything, that I should go to college someday, that I should have a career, that I specifically should not depend on a man. Ultimately, though, for my parents, going to a liberal arts school and majoring in something like history or English, like they just would never have gotten their head around that. The whole thing was, you need a trade, right?
Sure.
So ultimately, it became, I was good at math, I was good at science, engineering was something I would certainly be able to get a job with afterwards, and so that's how I ended up choosing engineering. I chose chemical engineering because I liked chemistry. At the time, I didn't really understand or appreciate that chemical engineering had very little to do with actual chemistry, much more to do with physics. But I just didn't know what I didn't know. I also thought I was going to be a doctor, which I think is very common for kind of first generation students, that their parents, like that's the penultimate of sort of career options. And I thought chemical engineering would be an easy way to get into medical school. Ultimately, I'll never regret majoring in chemical engineering, but when I think about it, I think I gave up a lot at Princeton by majoring in engineering because, there was this, entire wealth of liberal arts education available to me. And I will be honest, for my liberal arts courses, I took pretty much whatever was the easiest thing that I could find. Like we called them guts back then. I don't know if you still call them guts, but like rock for jocks was a gut, that kind of thing. So, when I got out of school, I decided I didn't want to be a doctor, and I tried one summer being a real chemical engineer for Procter & Gamble out in Cincinnati in an R&D lab working on a frying fat. And I realized that I didn't want to do research and I didn't want to be in a lab. Ultimately, when I got out of school, I chose to work for a technical firm, a firm that made circuit boards, but I worked on the business side. And so I was actually interfaced with our clients, and I did pricing, and I managed all of their work. Ford Motor was my biggest client. And that's when the first time I was exposed to business. I was exposed to a P&L. I was exposed to actually kind of the decisions that get made in running a company, and I decided to go to business school. So I went to business school, which was great for me because I think the combination of an engineering background and business training is very, very powerful. When I got out of business school, I worked for a Japanese company that was interested in my technical background. And I was doing a lot of work basically buying American technology type companies and getting involved in project finance, and it was all very interesting, but it was a Japanese company. I didn't really see the long-term opportunity there. It was still, you're talking the early 1990s. There was not a lot of women, working for the organization. And so I decided to switch, and I just had an opportunity fall into my lap, and it happened to be in media. And at the time, again, I think a lot of people go to college, they want to be journalists or they want to work in media. I was not one of those people, but when I got there, I loved it. And so I liked the fact that we had a consumer-facing product. I liked the fact that I was surrounded by very creative people. I think the whole editorial side, the editorial process, the creative process is fascinating. I love how their minds think very differently than mine, and I like how our minds come together. I think that they've inspired me to be more creative. Hopefully I've inspired them to be more business oriented. And so I kind of fell into it and just never left.
were you kind of exposed to that opportunity because someone presented it to you, or did you kind of just like find it yourself and just decide to go after?
Ultimately, again, I knew I wasn't going to stay forever at the place I was at because I didn't really see the career progression. And so I decided to start looking, and I actually looked at a bunch of different opportunities. This one happened to be through a recruiter, and it was a great opportunity. It was for a company at the time was called K3 Communications. It became Prime Media. It was the first private equity-backed leverage buildup. We were backed by KKR, and they had sort of a program which it's hard to find, but if you can, it's the best thing to do. It was a company that was growing very heavily through acquisitions, and what they chose to do is they would bring in at the corporate level a bunch of MBAs, and we would work on corporate strategy and work on deals and acquisitions and all of that stuff with the idea that they were developing a bench that they would then parachute into the various portfolio companies they bought. And that, I'll be honest with you, that was what was more attractive to me than the fact that it was media. It was more sort of, I saw the real potential in that, this opportunity to kind of work at the senior level with a CEO and with the board, and ultimately they would move you into a position that you were completely not qualified for, but because you'd had that exposure, and they had this belief that you just needed to hire smart people and they would figure it out. That's what attracted me. But again, it was media, and media is fun. I mean, it's changing, but it's very, very fun. So
yeah. So I had a follow-up question about like media in general, or more about the people you kind of like work with in media. So you talked about like surrounding yourself with creative people. I was wondering, how do you kind of find the right people to surround yourself with so that they improve you and you help improve them?
Well, I don't really pick the people on the editorial side. I mean, obviously I choose my team, and my team certainly makes me better every day, and I think we're really only as good as the people that work for us, and I think that's important to acknowledge. Again, I've worked for premier companies in the media space, and they've hired some of the best out there, and again, I've learned from them because their thought process is completely different than mine. And I like to think that they've learned from me. So it's been a very kind of symbiotic relationship. I mean, it's hard sometimes when you're the sort of the business side in a very sort of creative oriented company, because you're really not kind of the product, right? So you could choose to be somewhere. I mean, if I'd gone in investment banking, I would have been the product, and I probably would have been very, very good at it. But I did like being in that kind of, different environment. I liked producing a product that was used by consumers. I liked the whole ad sales creative process. And I was lucky enough to always kind of be, I came in at a senior level, so had a real opportunity to drive decision making while being surrounded by these incredibly, fascinating people.
Got it. Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit now about mentoring. So that was something you brought up in like the panel. So first I want to talk about your mentors and kind of how they guided you. And you also said you had like a lot of male mentors. I was wondering if you also had like a female mentor, and if you could tell me a little bit like what the difference between the two was.
Right. I would say I had more male mentors than female mentors, because by and large, what I said, it's interesting working in publishing, certainly the companies that I've worked for, which are largely Prime Media, Condé Nast, Hearst. There's a lot of women within the editorial ranks. There's a lot of women in the ad sales, the publishing ranks. There hasn't historically been a lot of women at the top. And so a lot of the people I worked for were men, but they were men who saw a lot of value in what I brought to the table and helped me develop my career and kind of give me opportunities that I, that I might not have been qualified for, but they thought, they kind of gave me a shot. And I think a lot of your career, it's because you work really hard, and a lot of your career is because you've gotten lucky enough to align yourself with somebody who takes an interest and kind of helps you develop. I did work for one woman, really honestly, in the course of my career, which is since 1985, so you're talking a really, really long time. I've been out of business school for 30 years now. I've only really worked for one woman, which is sort of shocking,
crazy, yeah.
right? That in and of itself speaks volumes. I think it was less formal, more supportive. I wish that I would have worked for more women. I think that I think women bring a different kind of touch to the workforce. I learned a lot from everybody that I worked for. I'm not gonna say I didn't. But women give more feedback. I think that men have trouble giving women feedback. I think it was also kind of like working more closely with a friend than actually kind of a mentor-boss relationship. And so I kind of wish I had more of that, but again, you kind of get to a certain level of an organization if everybody is a guy on top, a guy at the most senior levels. That's what you're going to end up working for.
Sure, right. So when you're kind of like seeking out mentors, do you actively try to get into that mentor relationship, or is it more of an organic development that those are kind of just the people that you're working with?
I would say for me, it's been more organic. I know that, a lot of places, and maybe I should have been more proactive about it. I know that there's a lot that, women should seek out mentors, women should seek out people who help drive and develop their career. From very, very early on, and I would say it was that first position at Primedia, kind of the first position in media I had. It was set up that you had mentors because, again, it was a bunch of kind of more junior people working with the most senior management of the company, and since then, I think that I bring a lot of value to the organizations I work for. I really truly have confidence in that. And I think that because of that, I've been lucky enough that there have been a lot of people very interested in my career. I think that it's important that you find yourself at organizations that promote talent and that actually kind of have sort of, whether called high potential programs, where they're actively looking at who within the organization has the potential to grow, pairing them up with mentors and trying to drive their career forward. A lot of times that's larger companies, who have the, sort of more of the bandwidth for that kind of thing. But again, for me, it just kind of happened without me having to think about it. But like I said, that may not have been a good thing. Maybe I should have worked a little harder at it.
And then my second follow-up question is about you as a mentor. So obviously you are now in a very powerful position in Hearst. And I was wondering, do you try to seek out women to mentor or?
Right, so that's like such an interesting question because I actually try to seek out excellence, right? And regardless of it being male or female. And I certainly, try to look to have women within my organization, which isn't always easy because there's still more men in finance than there are women. And when there are women in my organization, to give them more, to give them opportunities, to give them a voice. But I want to be careful that I don't do that to the detriment of the men that work for me. Again, I think that we're really only as good as executives as the team that we put underneath us, and I want my team to have the best people on it regardless of gender. So I'm careful because I don't want women not to have opportunities because they're women, but I also don't want men to be passed over because they're men.
And then kind of a final question about your career. So you mentioned that you took a leave for
3 years.
3 years,
3
right?
years.
So how did you manage to transition back during that time?
That was super lucky. This is where I would say, remember, so I said I sort of feel like my life is a little bit of a Cinderella story and that I've had a fairy godmother looking out for me. I actually chose to leave the workforce after I had my second child. My husband and I were moving out of Manhattan. It was a good time for me to leave Primedia. I left to consult with the ex-CEO of Primedia, who was a very important mentor. He had left Primedia and was kind of starting again, acquiring companies. I moved out to the suburbs. I had my third child. I was quietly miserable. I don't think I would have admitted it at the time, because I think that women, the one thing that they tell you is that you're supposed to, if you have the opportunity to stay home with your kid, you're supposed to be very happy about that. So I was quietly unhappy, knew that at some point I wanted to get back into the workforce, but really wasn't thinking about it. And this comes from, the luck of, or the importance of building relationships, is that, I had worked with a bunch of people who knew what I brought to the table, and someone who I had worked for got a call from a recruiter who was looking for an SVP finance for Condé Nast. And he was kind enough to pass along my name to say, she's not working, but she's really who you want, so maybe she'd be interested in coming back. He and I hadn't spoken for a while. Kind of the perfect starter job for somebody with 3 small children kind of fell into my lap. I think it's really, really hard for women who leave, and I think that I got incredibly lucky. I think that there's a lot of companies now trying to make it easier for women. There's this whole untapped group of women out there who have a lot to bring, and for whatever reason took a few years off, who have a hard time coming back. That being said, I'm going to be 100% honest with you. I counsel my daughters not to leave, because I do think I got really lucky, and I do think it's challenging, but hopefully, again, that's changing as well. That
Sure.
That over time, people will realize that men need to take time off and women need to take time off, and that we all have to sort of have balance in our lives, and that companies make it a little bit easier to come back. But for me, seriously, luck. Stars aligned. I got lucky.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, now transitioning to talking a little bit more about Hearst. So since Hearst is primarily like a magazine company, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like the digitization of today. And
Absolutely.
Kind of the role
So
of
Hearst is actually, I work for Hearst Magazines Group. Hearst is not just a magazine company, because we have newspapers, which is its own problem. We have TV stations. We have an entire division called Hearst Health. That's amazing healthcare information. We have a transportation information business, and we have Fitch, which is the 3rd largest ratings agency and kind of quickly taking share. That being said, I am in Hearst Magazines, which is I work on domestic websites and magazines. We have international websites and magazines, and we have a few other companies in our portfolio. I'm not gonna, it's been a challenging time for the industry. It's kind of a fascinating time in the industry, because we are managing this transition from print to digital. We have great content. People just want to consume it differently, but it makes it really, really intellectually interesting to kind of manage this transition. Sometimes gut-wrenching, because we're making very, very hard decisions about the organization, but we are doing really, really interesting things. It's, like I said, it's intellectually interesting to try to figure out how to manage this one revenue stream that may be declining a little bit while you're investing in growth in a new revenue stream. That being said, our digital business, because of the strong brands that we have, so we have really strong brands. I mean, we have Harper's Bazaar and Elle and Cosmopolitan, and also because of the great talent that we're able to attract because of those brands, our digital business is incredibly strong. And I think that we're doing really, really interesting things. I think that if you look at our digital business compared to the pure plays that are now kind of going through a lot of consolidation, that we are far stronger, and we're stronger because of our print legacy. And we still believe in print, and there's certainly consumers that still like that form factor. I really think it's just about content, producing great content, and then letting the consumer pick which form factor they choose to absorb it in. But it's definitely a more challenging time.
Sure,
You can
yeah.
see the industry consolidating. You've seen titles shutting down. We are. I think that we're probably managing the process better than anybody else in the industry. And again, from my perspective, it makes it incredibly. It's a complex problem to solve.
Yeah. Do you think that there's still a place for print products, or do you think that's gonna eventually just die?
I don't know. I mean, I see there's definitely still consumers who demand print. There's definitely, do I think it's going to be as many in the past, and that the magazines have rate bases, right? So, Cosmo's rate base was 3 million. I do think that will be contracting over time as people choose to absorb or, get the Cosmo content, whether it be through Snapchat or, on Snapchat Discover, or whether it be through our website. There's this thing now where millennials kind of abandon print, but they're saying that Gen Z embraces print a little bit more, that they prefer print textbooks, that they prefer, my daughters certainly prefer, it's funny, I'm the one who reads on a Kindle, and they're the ones that prefer the actual hard copy of a book. I think that there's probably a role. I think it's probably smaller than it was before, but it's important to support the brand digitally. And we'll just see how it evolves.
Of course,
and
yeah.
again, that's like probably one of the most fun parts of my job, is figuring out this evolution and figuring out how to manage resources through this very complex kind of transition.
Got it. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's fun. Again, sometimes a little, gut wrenching, but
yeah, I'm sure.
but mostly fun.
So you also mentioned during the panel that magazines tend to focus on women, but the men tend to be the people who are
At the very
yeah.
highest level, there seems, again, in the organizations I've worked for, it seems to be more men at the top than women. And again, I'm not 100% sure how that happened. I do think that I do ascribe a little bit to this broken rung thing, that I think women, there's just a smaller pool to choose from. I do think women are making trade-offs all through their careers that may impact whether or not they even want to take that CEO step. But I do think it's changing. And certainly Hearst, I have to say, is acknowledging the fact that they need, sort of more diversity of talent at the top. We just hired our first kind of chief talent officer, and she came from McKinsey, and one of the things that she did at McKinsey was increase the number of women consultants and women partners. And I think that bringing her on was an express acknowledgement that we need to kind of diversify the executive ranks. And I think that's the first step, a company that has to be committed to it.
Right. Have you seen diversification happen yet, or is it still kind of like?
I actually have. I do think that, again, I think that there's a conscious effort. I think that it happens. I don't think a company goes out of their way to just not hire women. I think it's just happens unconsciously, right? And that that there's fewer women going after those opportunities, for whatever kind of trade-offs they're making. But I think that when a company acknowledges that they need to kind of really work on their diversity, and that they're going to take a look, and we've just done this within the magazine group, when they want to take a look at kind of their ranks and set targets for themselves. That's how I think things start to change and lead to change very quickly.
Sure. And have you seen kind of a difference in the culture of the company, or a change in kind of the content that you're putting out because of this, the increased number of women, or the increased hiring practices?
So again, we've always had a lot of women, but magazines, definitely didn't always represent real women, and so there's definitely been more of a focus on more diversity within our content, which is a good place to start, so that more people can see themselves in our pages. sites, and so that's definitely been an effort at Hearst, and for which I've seen change. Again, the company is really focused much more so on promoting women, which is great. And I think, again, they just brought in this chief talent officer who's a woman. They're trying to kind of fill the executive ranks, give more women more opportunity. We have we have a little incubator within Hearst, which is for women-run businesses, bringing some of our resources to them and bringing them into our company and giving them access to women mentors within the company. So I think Hearst is doing a lot of the right things. I think that, I really I'm excited about the day that I hope comes when we don't actually have to talk about it anymore, when there is no difference, that the executive ranks are more reflective of the population, and that, we don't have to promote women so much, for being women, that it's just happening just because, they're the best people for the position, and, we don't have to think about it anymore, that we don't have to force it.
Got it.